Back in the 1800s, tucked away in a hollow near Ohio's Vermilion River, stood an orphanage for unwanted children. Now, as with most orphanages back in the day, living conditions were poor, and the children were often mistreated. One night, a fire broke out, and within the blink of an eye, all of the children had their lives extinguished in the smoke and flames. While catastrophic fires were not uncommon in the 1800s, the cause of this tragedy was, at the very least, suspect. No one could answer as to how the fire started or why Old Man Gore, the owner of the orphanage, made it out alive when all of the children under his care perished. Today we are visiting the site where it's said the children's spirits roam, looking for help from beyond the grave. The site where we will learn the legend and the history of Gore Orphanage, one of Ohio's most haunted locations. So if you're curious, let's take a walk through history. Old Man Gore, as he was called, was not the tragedy's only suspect. Yes, he despised the children and only started the orphanage to gain free labor to tend his fields and collect state money. But it didn't make sense that he would destroy his own lucrative operation. So if it wasn't him, then who? Well, there were several suspects. Some say a former farmhand who Gore fired was a prime suspect. It seemed that the employee was getting paid, but wasn't earning the money. Jobs were left undone or not even started, and Gore wasn't willing to pay someone for merely hanging around. So after losing his job, the farmhand may have exacted his revenge by setting the farm and the orphanage ablaze, killing the young occupants inside. Another suspect was known as the Man in the Woods. Seems appropriate. He was a neighbor of sorts who lived alone in the woods and despised the children. They were much too loud for his liking, and, after complaining several times about the noise, decided to take matters into his own hands, lighting the fire that would forever silence the children. It could be that cholera played a role in the tragedy. That epidemic struck terror in the hearts of residents in the 1800s. It may be that some of the children contracted the disease, and fearing so much for their own lives, residents of the community could have lit the orphanage in a vain attempt to halt the spread. Murder for self-preservation. Whoever caused the fire would never be determined. Authorities could never prove a case, so they were left with burying what remains they could find and leaving behind nothing but foundation ruins and the specters of those who were mistreated in life and death. Old Man Gore walked away from the burned ruins and disappeared into antiquity, but the children continued to make their presence known. Visitors to this site often hear the screams of children, desperately trying to escape their fiery graves, as if the tragedy is replaying itself through some torn veil between the living and the dead. And others say they have witnessed apparitions of children engulfed in flames, running through these woods, only to trip and fall, vanishing as they hit the earth. And perhaps the most chilling experience visitors report is that when they return to their parked cars, after exploring the ruins, small handprints can be seen on their vehicles, as if the orphans have been admiring what have been unknown to them back in the 1800s. With such a tragic event, you would think that the Park Service, who now owns this land, would at least erect a monument or a marker to honor the lives that were lost in the site. Well, I'm sure they would, except the ghostly tale of Gore Orphanage didn't happen here, and in fact, didn't happen at all. time for some history. Let's start with Gore Orphanage itself. There never was a Gore Orphanage. Now, I know what you're thinking, but John, you literally showed us a road sign earlier in the video that said Gore Orphanage Road. Yeah, we did. We are, in fact, on Gore Orphanage Road, but the road is not named after a building, per se. It's named after an old land surveying term called a gore. Simply put, a gore is a wedge-shaped piece of land created by conflicting surveys claiming the same land. Orphanage Road was originally named Baldwin Road, and it ran through this gore. And locals started calling it Orphanage Road because there was indeed an orphanage on the road. It was called the Orphanage of Light and Hope. And at this point, I think you might find that history can indeed be as strange as legend. So Light of Hope was established in 1902 by a religious zealot named Reverend Johann Sprunger. Johann and his wife Katerina moved to this area after their former orphanage in Bern, Indiana was, oddly enough, destroyed by fire. 3 orphan girls reportedly died in that fire, and 2 of Sprunger's former Indiana businesses had also ended by fire. Katerina was the daughter of Christian Sprunger. And though no explanation has ever been given regarding Katerina's surname being the same as her husband's, a diary of a worker at the former orphanage in Bern states that it was run by brother and sister Sprunger. Now, whether brother and sister is a religious title or a genealogical reference is unclear. Now, before moving to Ohio, the couple already lost 2 children. Their daughter, Hilaganda, died at the age of 7, and their son, Edmund, died at birth. The deaths appeared to spark an obsession for religious pursuits in the couple. The new orphanage consisted of 4 farm buildings and covered over 500 acres. An abandoned mansion once owned by Joseph Swift was also on the property, but Reverend Sprunger didn't utilize the mansion for the new orphanage. Instead, he attempted to build a new, self-sustaining religious community on the property. A community that would hold up to 120 children at a time. Boys lived at a farm called the Hughes Farm, and girls at the Howard Farm. It's clear that the orphans were severely mistreated by the Sprungers and other workers at the farm. Children who escaped the orphanage told horrific stories of abuse, neglect, and slave labor. Orphans were said to eat a diet of calf lungs, hogs' heads, and sick cattle when they were fed at all. Corn was boiled in the same pot used to boil soiled underwear, and although there were cows on the farm, children were said to often only be given butter once a week, and occasionally pepper or sugar. The children's rooms were infested with rats and vermin, and on occasion, rats crawled into the beds and bit children while they slept. There was said to be only 1 bathtub for the boys, which they were allowed to use once every 2 weeks, and had to use the same water. Orphans told stories of Sprunger and the farmhands beating them with a strap until large welts appeared on their bodies. Sprunger would also rent out the orphans to neighboring farmers, a type of slave labor, if you will. Illness and disease were mostly treated by only prayers, and witnesses stated the children lacked any type of regular schooling. In 1909, an investigation was conducted, but because the state of Ohio had no laws or regulations pertaining to the operation of orphanages, nothing formally could be done about the conditions, even though the Sprungers admitted to most of the allegations against them. Mr. Sprunger died in 1910, and the doors of the orphanage permanently closed in July of 1916, after years of financial troubles. Pelham Hooker Blossom of Cleveland bought the orphanage property, leased it to farmers for a period, and then finally sold the land. Part of the orphanage buildings were burned, and the rest were torn down. The children of the Light of Hope Orphanage were dispersed throughout the community or returned to their relatives or guardians, and the nightmare of Gore Orphanage was over. So let's talk a bit about the abandoned mansion. The once magnificent Greek Revival house was built in the 19th century by Joseph Swift, a successful farmer. This foundation you see here today are all that remains of the Swift mansion, not the orphanage. In 1831, Swift's 5-year-old daughter, Tryphenia, died. And in 1841, Swift's 24-year-old son, Herman, also died. And soon after, Swift's fortunes dried up due to poor investments in the railroad, and he sold the mansion to Nicholas Wilbur, a renowned spiritualist. Now, Wilbur's children were rumored to be psychic and could communicate with the ghosts of dead children. Mysterious rituals and seances were said to be held regularly in the secluded mansion, and the ghosts of children were said to appear frequently at the seances. Early legend held that Mr. Wilbur helped the Sprungers build the Light of Hope Orphanage after losing his own grandchildren. Mrs. Wilbur was said to have gone insane over the tragedy. Stories were told that she'd set the table 3 times a day and passed food to the grandkids as if they were sitting there. And at night, she would light a lamp and say, "Time for bed, children, come on." And then she'd put the kids to bed. After the demise of the orphanage, Swift Mansion became a mecca for late-night vandals, and it's presumed that one of them was responsible for burning the house down in late 1923. But today, all that remains are sandstone blocks from its foundation. They stand in the forest like guide stones for all those daring enough to seek an experience of the legend of Gore Orphanage. And though there's no evidence that any deaths occurred at Gore Orphanage, the chilling memory of torture, abuse, and occult activity are haunting in their own right. Paranormal investigators say ghosts of Gore Orphanage Road may be esoteric imprints, a kind of snapshot in time. And whatever the true story of Gore Orphanage is, there's little doubt that it has well earned the reputation as one of the most haunted areas in Ohio. Thanks for watching today, folks, and we'll see you next time as we explore more curious history. Take care.